People think 90 is a number you arrive at, like a station. No, 90 is a country you get exiled to. Your body becomes a slow language. Your memories become too loud. And the world, always eager to simplify a man, calls you either lucky or ruined. As if a life could be reduced to the balance of a bank account. I have been both. I was a millionaire before I had learned how to be a husband. I lost everything before I learned how to be a man. And I rebuilt it, piece by piece, trade by trade, when most people are already rehearsing their goodbyes. If you're listening to me now, keep one thing clear. This isn't a story about money. Money is only the scent on the predator's breath. This is a story about betrayal, which is older than currency and sharper than any knife. It's a story about how love can be forged into a weapon, and how the hand that breaks you can be the same hand that later begs you for mercy. My name is Elias Mercer, and I have been dead before without ever dying. I grew up in a house that always smelled like iron and rain. My father worked the docks. My mother made miracles out of thin flour and stubbornness. We had no savings, no safety net. Only the belief that if you work hard enough, the world would eventually blink and reward you. It doesn't, but it can be forced. I was 16 when I learned that money is not earned the way schools tell you. Money is moved. Money is persuaded. Money is pulled from the future and made to sit politely in the present. I didn't know the words for it then: leverage, arbitrage, asymmetric risk. I just knew I could look at a problem and see the weak seam. At 22, I built my first real company in a rented office above a butcher shop. The floorboard shook when trucks unloaded meat below. The smell was a kind of hunger you couldn't escape. I liked it. It reminded me I wasn't born for comfort. I was born for conquest. I built a logistics system that made deliveries faster, cheaper, predictable. Something businesses will pay for the way dying men pay for air. Within 3 years, the butcher shop office was gone, replaced by a glass building that reflected the sky like a polished lie. By 28, the newspapers called me the young tycoon. They loved the myth, the poor boy with the perfect mind. They didn't see the nights I spent bleeding into spreadsheets until sunrise, the shaking in my hands from too much coffee, the way my heart sometimes skipped like it wanted to escape the cage of my ribs. That came later. What mattered then was that I could buy anything. And I did. I bought suits that made me look older, watches that convinced people I was already inevitable, a penthouse that sat above the city like a crown. Then at 30, I made my most expensive purchase. I bought love, or rather, I bought the illusion of it. Her name was Mary Ann. She wore elegance the way other women wore perfume, something that entered a room before she did. She had a laugh that could make men forget their own names and a softness in her eyes that made you believe she was incapable of cruelty. That's how the best ones look. She was not the kind of woman you meet in ordinary places. You meet her in rooms filled with expensive conversations and champagne flutes, in galleries where people stare at art they don't understand, because understanding isn't the point. Being seen is. I saw her first at an auction. A painting went for a number so absurd it made the crowd murmur like churchgoers. She didn't bid. She didn't even look impressed. She looked amused, as if money was a joke told by people who needed it. I should have run. Instead, I walked up to her like a man who believed he could buy sunlight and keep it in his pocket. Do you think it's worth it? I asked, gesturing toward the painting. She turned her head slowly, like a queen acknowledging a servant. Worth is a story people tell themselves so they can sleep at night, she said. The only real question is, who wants it more? I remember laughing. I remember thinking, finally, someone who speaks my language. That was the first hook. She understood hunger. She understood the theater of power. And she understood me. Or so I thought. You should know something about success. It attracts 3 types of people. The first are admirers. They are harmless. They want proximity, photographs, a story to tell. The second are beggars. They want your money. The third are partners. Partners are the most dangerous because they don't want what you have. They want the machine that makes it. That's where Calvin Rourke enters. He was older than me by 7 years, with a smile that looked sincere until you stared long enough and realized sincerity was not its origin. It was its disguise. Calvin had a gift for making people feel like they were the center of his attention. When he spoke to you, his eyes didn't dart. They settled. Predators don't rush. I met him at a conference in Chicago, back when I was still climbing. My company had just landed a major contract, and I was drunk on the smell of my own ascent. Calvin approached me after my panel. "Mercer," he said, holding out a hand, "you're going to be a problem for a lot of comfortable men." That line, that exact line, it struck my vanity like a match to gasoline. We drank that night, then again the next month. Then we started calling each other for advice. He had connections I didn't. I had speed he envied. Together, we were, how did he put it, an engine with no brakes. When I proposed we merge our operations into a larger investment and logistics group, Calvin didn't hesitate. He acted surprised, honored, even reluctant, as if he didn't already want exactly what I was offering. "Elias," he said, as though speaking a prayer, "I don't want to get in the way of what you're building." He smiled. That smile was a doorway, and I walked through it. Within 2 years, Calvin was not just my partner. He was my brother in the eyes of the world. The press loved our dynamic. The visionary and the strategist, youth and experience, fire and steel. Meanwhile, Marian became my wife. If you're wondering whether Calvin and Marian knew each other before me, I wondered too. Later. At the time, I was too busy believing in my own invincibility. Our wedding was a performance staged for the gods of wealth. Flowers flown in from the Netherlands, a band imported from Paris. Guests who arrived wearing smiles that cost more than some houses. Marian walked down the aisle with a face so calm, I mistook it for purity. And when she took my hand, she squeezed once, a tiny pressure, a private signal. I interpreted it as affection. Now at 90, I understand it for what it was, a measurement, the way a jeweler tests gold. The first crack in a dam is never dramatic. It is a small betrayal of expectation. A number that doesn't match, a tone in someone's voice, a door closed too quietly. For me, it began with a missing file. I was in my office late. The city outside like a necklace of lights. Calvin had sent me an email earlier about a new acquisition. The numbers were solid. The narrative was perfect. It was one of those deals that made you feel not just rich, but smart. I opened the share drive. The folder was there. But inside it, the contracts were gone. Not deleted. Not moved. Gone. A clean absence. I called our legal counsel. He hesitated before speaking, and hesitation is always a confession in disguise. "Elias, Calvin asked me to revise the structure last week. Without me," I asked. Another pause. "He said you'd approved it." I stared at the dark reflection of myself in the window, a man in a tailored suit, with the posture of certainty, suddenly looking like a stranger. "Forward me the revisions." He did, and there it was, a subtle shift in control, buried under paragraphs in legal language like a blade under velvet. Calvin's ownership stake in one of our most valuable subsidiaries had quietly increased, not by much, just enough to matter. That night, I confronted Calvin. He was in his office, feet on the desk, brandy in hand, like a man who owned time itself. He listened. He nodded. He looked almost disappointed. "Elias," he said gently, "you're tired." "I'm precise." I snapped. He raised his hands, palms out. "You're right," he said. The structure needed tweaking. It was a technicality. I didn't want to bother you. That was the second hook. Concern. He made it sound like a kindness, like he was protecting me from stress. And I, foolishly, allowed the explanation to soothe me, because it was easier than believing the alternative. Calvin stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We're building a legacy," he said. "Don't let paranoia poison it." Paranoia, such a clever word. It's what people call your instincts when your instincts are inconvenient. I left his office feeling ashamed of my suspicion. That should tell you everything you need to know about how skillfully he played me. Marianne, when I mentioned it later, simply kissed my cheek and said, "You worry too much. Darling, Calvin adores you." She said it like a fact. The collapse didn't come as a single blow. It came as a symphony, a coordinated, layered unraveling. Bank calls, investor panic. Lawsuits arriving like black envelopes of doom. It began on a Tuesday morning. I remember because Marianne had placed a cup of coffee on the counter and looked at me with a kind of softness that, in hindsight, makes my stomach turn. "Big day," she asked. I nodded, distracted, scanning my phone. There were messages, too many. Missed calls. The little red badges stacking like blood drops. I walked into my office and found my assistant pale as paper. "Elias, the board is meeting without you." "What?" I laughed once, like the idea itself was absurd. Then my phone rang. It was our bank. "Mr. Mercer," the voice said, too formal, too controlled. "We need to discuss certain irregularities." "Irregularities?" I asked. "Your accounts have been flagged. Several lines of credit have been suspended pending investigation." I felt the first cold lick of fear. Investigation into what? There was a sigh, a pause heavy with legal caution. Embezzlement. That word struck like a hammer. I stepped back. "That's impossible." "Mr. Mercer," the voice continued, "we have documentation suggesting unauthorized transfers connected to your signature." My signature. I hung up and immediately called Calvin. No answer. I called again. No answer. I stormed into the boardroom. 2 security guards stopped me at the door as if I were a stranger in my own kingdom. One of them, an older man I'd seen in the building for years, couldn't meet my eyes. "Sir, we've been instructed." Instructed by who? I demanded. The door opened. Calvin stood inside, calm as a priest. Behind him, board members sat stiffly. Lawyers lined the table like vultures in suits. And in the center of the room, at the head of the table, sat Marianne, my wife, in my chair. She looked up at me, not with fear, not with guilt, with poise, like this was always where she belonged. My breath hitched. My body tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. "Marianne?" I said, the word breaking. Calvin stepped forward, hands clasped as if he were about to deliver a eulogy. "Elias," he said softly, "this is difficult, but the company has to protect itself." Protect itself from me? I almost choked on the question. Marianne folded her hands on the table. "Please don't make this uglier," she said. That sentence, that tone, like I was a child ruining a formal dinner. A lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside were pages and pages of evidence, transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts. My name on everything. My signature. My authorization codes. My identity turned into a weapon. I stared, mind racing, trying to find the seam, the weak spot. "This isn't me," I said. "Someone forged." Calvin interrupted, his voice dripping with sorrow. "We wanted to believe that, Elias. But there's more." He nodded to another lawyer, who opened a laptop and played a recording. My voice filled the room. My laugh. My cadence. A conversation about moving funds. About hiding assets. About taking what's owed. It was my voice. But it wasn't my words. A deepfake, you'd call it today. Back then, we didn't even have a name for that kind of evil. We just called it ruin. The board members shifted uncomfortably, looking at me like a man suddenly revealed to be diseased. And then Marianne said the final line, the one that truly killed me, "I'm filing for divorce." My mouth went dry. I looked at her as if I'd never seen her before. "You're doing this?" She sighed, a performance of exhaustion. "I've been trying to save you from yourself," she said, "but you won't accept help." Help. She called betrayal help. Calvin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, like a supportive partner. That touch, a small gesture, easy to miss. But I saw it, and in that instant, the whole puzzle snapped into place. Not all the details, those would come later, but the shape, the truth had a silhouette. They were together. The guards at the door tightened their stance. Calvin stepped closer to me and lowered his voice so only I could hear. "I told you not to let paranoia poison it," he whispered. "Now look." His breath smelled like brandy and victory. I wanted to swing at him, to smash his perfect teeth into the floor. But violence would have been exactly what they needed to complete the portrait of me as unstable, criminal, dangerous. Instead, I stood very still. I looked at Mary Ann. Her eyes didn't flinch. That's what I remember most. Not the financial destruction, not the humiliation, not even Calvin's smile. I remember my wife's eyes, empty of love, empty of regret, two polished stones. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to underline the cruelty, my phone buzzed. A notification. Account frozen. In a single morning, I stopped being Elias Mercer, the millionaire. I became Elias Mercer, the accused, a man stripped not only of wealth, but of credibility, of the invisible armor that money provides. They escorted me out like a thief. Employees watched from desks, mouths half open, eyes wide. A man who had once ruled the building, now reduced to a spectacle. Outside, the air was too bright. The city kept moving like nothing had happened. And that's the strange thing about catastrophe. It feels personal, but the world remains indifferent. I walked home. I tried to enter my penthouse. The key card didn't work. The doorman, a man who had once greeted me like royalty, looked down at a clipboard and said, "Mrs. Mercer has instructed us not to allow you upstairs." Not your wife. Not Mary Ann. Mrs. Mercer. As if she owned the title. As if I had never existed. I stood there in the lobby, hearing the faint hum of elevators and distant laughter, and I realized something terrifying. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my name. Like she'd checked. Like she'd know. And perhaps she did. I slept that night in a cheap hotel that smelled like mildew and resignation. I didn't tell anyone where I was. Pride is a disease that persists even after everything else is amputated. In the morning, I returned to the building, not to plead, not to beg, to retrieve my things. I expected a conversation, a confrontation. Instead, I found my life packed into 3 suitcases and placed on the curb like garbage. No note, no apology, just luggage. A passerby glanced at me with mild curiosity, as if I were simply another man having a bad day. I opened the first suitcase. Clothes, folded, careless. The second suitcase held shoes and belts. The third suitcase was the one that nearly made me collapse. Inside were photographs. Our wedding. Trips. Smiling faces that now looked like a cruel joke. At the bottom, beneath the photos, was a small velvet box. My heart lurched. For a half-second, I thought, no, inside was my wedding ring. Not hers. Mine. Returned like a receipt. I stood there on the sidewalk, suitcases around me, ring in my hand, and the most humiliating thought of all rose in my mind. I would have forgiven her. If she'd come down, if she'd cried, if she'd said she was scared, confused, manipulated, I would have tried to understand. That's what love does. It turns you into a volunteer at your own execution. But she didn't come down, because this wasn't a mistake. It was a plan, and it had been underway long before I ever kissed her in that auction hall. That was the moment I made a silent vow. I would not die in the story they wrote for me. 2 weeks later, the charges came. Official letters. Court dates. Freezing orders. The slow machinery of law. Grinding me into public pulp. Friends evaporated. Some didn't even call. Others called only to say, "I'm sorry," in a tone that meant, "Please don't drag me down with you." Calvin appeared on television, solemn and composed, talking about a betrayal we never expected and the importance of accountability. Mary Ann appeared once, photographed leaving a charity gala with Calvin's arm around her waist, her face serene. They weren't hiding. They were celebrating. And I, sitting alone in that mildew hotel, watched the footage and felt something inside me rearrange into a new shape. Not sadness, not even rage. Clarity. Then on a rainy Thursday, I received a letter with no return address. No official seal. Just a plain envelope, slightly wrinkled, as if it had traveled a hard road to reach me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed 2 sentences. They didn't just steal from you. They killed someone to do it. My throat tightened. At the bottom of the page was a name, Rita Vance, and beneath it, a date from 3 months before my collapse. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. Rita Vance. I knew that name. She had been one of our internal auditors, quiet, meticulous, the kind of person who sees what others miss because she isn't distracted by ego. 3 months before my collapse, she had vanished from the company. Calvin told me she'd taken an unexpected leave. I hadn't asked enough questions. Now my stomach turned cold. I read the letter again. Then I did something I hadn't done since childhood. I prayed, not to God, to chance, to whatever force in the universe still had enough pity to offer me a path back. Because if the letter was true, if Rita Vance was dead, then Calvin and Marianne weren't just thieves. They were something worse. And worse meant vulnerable. Because murder, unlike money, leaves stains that can't be washed out with legal language. I folded the paper carefully, as if it were fragile, as if it were my last remaining asset. Then I put on my coat and stepped into the rain. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time since the boardroom, my feet felt like they belonged to me again. I had been pushed out of the world of power. Now I was going to climb back in through the sewer. I learned early that there are 2 ways to destroy a man. The first is to take what he has. The second is to convince the world he never deserved it. I was living the second. And when you're under that invisible sentence, you realize something terrifying. Truth is worth nothing without proof, and proof, in the world of predators, is the most expensive commodity of all. The letter with the name Rita Vance sat in my coat pocket, like a heated stone. It wasn't hope. It was something more dangerous. It was direction. If Calvin and Marianne had killed someone, then they'd cross a line that can't be erased. And anyone who crosses certain lines inevitably leaves marks, not because they want to, but because guilt demands repetition. A crime too large always has to be held up by even larger crimes. The question was, where was the crack? It was raining lightly, the kind that doesn't fall. It hangs in the air and decides to soak you out of spite. I walked streets I used to cross in a car with tinted windows, a silent engine, and the certainty the world owed me respect. Now I was just another man, back then not so old on the outside, but already old on the inside, wander with no destination, carrying a cursed name. I needed someone who knew things, but I couldn't go back to my old circles. I couldn't call expensive lawyers. I couldn't ask favors from politicians. All of that had been offered on the altar of my reputation, and my reputation was ash now. So I went the only place where truth still sold well, the dark corridors. I went looking for Doyle. Doyle wasn't a detective, at least not in the romantic sense. He was an ex-accountant for criminal outfits, a man who understood numbers the way you understand poison, by scent. I'd met him years earlier at a dinner, when a drunk banker joked about introducing a man who knows where money hides when it gets scared. Doyle had looked at me and said, "Money always hides behind beautiful people." At the time, I laughed. Marianne laughed too. Doyle didn't. Now, years later, I found him in a bar that looked like it had been built from shipwreck scraps. The light was low, the music was sad, and the air smelled like alcohol and secrets. He recognized me the second I walked in. "Elias Mercer," he said, not raising his voice. "You became news." I became prey. I corrected. He tilted his head, like a man assessing an injured animal. "You came to ask for help?" he asked. I sat without being invited. "I came to buy information." Doyle smiled with one corner of his mouth. "You don't have money anymore." I tapped the pocket where the letter was. "I have something better. I have a reason." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Talk." I pulled out the letter and slid it across the table. Doyle read it without expression, but I saw his pupils shift when he reached the name. "Rita Vance," he murmured, as if saying out loud was dangerous. That's not small." "So it's true?" I asked. Doyle looked up. "I didn't say that." My chest tightened. "Doyle, I lost everything. If hell exists, I've lived in it. I just need to know where the exit is." He stayed quiet too long. Then he leaned in. "You weren't supposed to know that name," he said. "Why?" "Because anyone who knows becomes the next piece that doesn't fit." I gripped the edge of the table. "I'm already a piece that doesn't fit." Doyle exhaled. "You want proof? Real proof?" he asked. "Then forget court. Forget justice. Justice is theater with expensive tickets. You need one thing, the money trail, because money lies, but it leaves footprints. And what do you want in return? I asked. Doyle chuckled low. I want to stay alive. Me too. Then listen, he said, and his voice hardened. Calvin didn't do this alone. Men like Calvin don't do anything alone. He buys hands. And Marianne? Doyle made a face. Your wife. She's the worst part. I swallowed. Why? Doyle nodded toward me, as if he was telling me to look inside myself. Because Calvin wants power. Marianne wants spectacle. She wants to win in a way everyone can see. She wants you alive just so you can watch. That sentence hit me with a cruelty so true it made me want to vomit. Doyle continued. I can give you a name, a place, a small thread, but if you pull it, you'll cut your hand. Give it to me. He grabbed a napkin and wrote 2 words. Holland Storage, and beneath it, an address. Document storage, he explained. The kind of place rich people keep things they pretend to forget. Rita showed up there twice before she vanished. And how do you know that? I asked. Doyle lifted his glass. Because I know everything the city tries to hide. And because someone paid me once to erase her name from a record. My body went cold. Who? Doyle tucked the napkin away again, as if even a name could set the air on fire. Whoever pays to erase a name is whoever fears that name, Elias. He stood up. Don't come looking for me again. And then he said the last thing before he left. If you find something, don't go to the police. Why? Doyle looked over his shoulder. Because police work for salary. Calvin works for ambition. Ambition buys salaries. And he disappeared into the rain, leaving me alone with an address and the feeling I had just stepped into a war where ammunition was information. The next morning, I went to Holland Storage. It was a faceless place, the kind that exists on the edge of a city like part of the infrastructure of forgetting. Tall gates, cameras, a small front office with a receptionist whose eyes looked tired. I introduced myself with a false name. I learned quickly that when you lose everything, you gain a skill. You become invisible. The woman looked at my improvised ID and typed something. Unit number? She asked. I don't have it, I said. I need access to an audit file. A woman named Rita Vance rented here. The receptionist frowned. I can't. I cut in with a gesture and pulled out an old watch. The kind I couldn't bring myself to sell because it had belonged to my father. I don't want trouble, I said. I just want 20 minutes. Her eyes dropped the watch. She hesitated. I watched the internal fight. Ethics versus electricity bill. In the end, she took the watch like she was taking sin. There is a unit, she said, but the contract was transferred. To whom? She bit her lip. To a company. Standard. No person's name. Which one? She pointed at the screen, as if she didn't want to say it out loud. I read, Rourke Holdings, LLC. The world went silent for half a second, like the universe itself held its breath. Calvin, of course. He didn't just steal from me. He wanted to own even the grave where the proof was buried. Can I see the unit? I asked, forcing my voice to stay neutral. The receptionist handed me an electronic key. 15 minutes, she said. If anyone asks, I didn't see you. I walked down narrow metal corridors, doors numbered like prison cells. The air smelled of old paper and plastic. Each unit held someone's lives. Contracts, photos, memories, secrets. Rita's unit was C-117. The door was locked, but I had the key. When I opened it, a wave of dust hit me as if the truth had been trapped in there for too long. Breathing with difficulty. Inside were boxes, many of them. I didn't have time to read everything. So I did what I'd always done in life. I looked for the weak seam. The boxes were organized by date. And in the corner there was a black folder with no label, like someone had tried to hide it using the absence of a name. I opened it. My heart began to pound violently. Inside were copies of statements, printed emails, flowcharts of money leaving the company and entering ghost structures. Corporate names I'd never seen, banks and tax havens, digital signatures. And then I saw what made me drop to my knees. A document, a transfer order, not with my signature, with Calvin's signature. And the destination of the transfer was an entity called Elias Mercer Trust. A trust, a legal vault, a castle built from paper. My wife wasn't just an accomplice. She was a destination. Nausea rose in me, horror mixed with something strange. Relief, because proof is like that. It hurts, but it frees you. I kept flipping through with shaking hands. And then came the first real plot twist of that chapter of my life. There was a photograph, printed on ordinary paper, like it had been taken in a rush. It showed an underground parking garage. Two men standing beside a car. One I recognized instantly, Calvin Rourke. The other, I recognized more slowly, like recognizing an old nightmare. He was the prosecutor who would later take my case. The man who, in public, would paint me as a criminal. In the photo, he was smiling like a friend. I nearly tore the photo apart with rage, but I forced my fingers to hold steady. If that was real, then my fall hadn't been only a corporate coup. It had been an institutional pact. And Rita Vance had seen it. That was why she vanished. I glanced at the clock in my mind. I needed to leave. But before I did, at the bottom of the folder, there was a brown envelope with a single word written by hand. In case I'd disappear. My hands turned icy. I opened it. Inside was a USB drive, and a note written in firm, desperate handwriting. Elias, I know you don't know me well, but I know who you are when no one is watching. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it out. Calvin Rourke is preparing something big, and your wife is more involved than you realize. The proof is here, but trust no one in the system. If I die, look for the watchman. He knows where they buried the rest. The watchman, my father, the watch now in the receptionist's pocket. Doyle, or someone else. A chill ran through me. Rita hadn't been auditing money. She'd been auditing souls, and she'd chosen to leave me a path. I took the USB drive and slid it into the inside pocket of my coat. As I shut the folder, I heard a sound, a metallic click. I froze. Footsteps in the corridor. Someone walking slowly, like a person who isn't in a hurry because he knows you have nowhere to go. I turned off the unit's light and pulled the door mostly closed, leaving only a thin crack. The footsteps stopped. A male voice spoke low. C-117, it's here. My blood turned to ice. I recognized that voice. I'd heard it in interviews, press conferences, courtrooms. It was the prosecutor, the man in the photo. So he wasn't just in the past. He was in the present, and he'd come personally. I held my breath as if breathing could betray me. The key turned in the lock. The door began to open, and in that second, I understood. Rita Vance hadn't just been silenced. She had been hunted, and now the hunt had my scent. The lock turned with the slow certainty of a verdict. The door crept open, and a blade of corridor light cut across the dust inside the unit. I pressed myself against the far wall, body rigid, breath held so tight it felt like my lungs were going to crack. I could hear him now, close enough that I could count the fibers in his suit if I'd been able to see. The prosecutor didn't step in immediately. He paused at the threshold like a man who enjoys the moment before impact. A second set of footsteps joined him, lighter, less confident, a subordinate, or a messenger. "Are you sure?" the second man whispered. The prosecutor answered without turning his head. "Rourke doesn't pay me to be unsure." So it was true, not a suspicion, not paranoia. A salary wasn't the only thing that could buy a badge. He stepped into the unit. The smell of cologne hit me, expensive, clean, clinical. The kind of scent that says, I've never had to kneel for anyone. He flipped a small flashlight on, sweeping it across the boxes, the folder rack, the old tape lines on the floor. "Look at that," he murmured. "Someone's been here." My throat tightened. My heart was a trapped animal. He walked deeper inside. I felt the air change as his presence closed distance. The world narrowed down to sound and pressure and the unbearable reality that I was one bad movement away from being discovered in a metal coffin of paper and dust. The prosecutor stopped at the corner, where I'd pulled the black folder. He bent, touched the edge of the box, and smiled to himself like a man admiring his own trap. He turned to the second man. "He's learning." "He?" the second man asked. The prosecutor's smile widened. "Mercer, my blood didn't just run cold. It congealed. He knew I was here. Or he believed I'd come here. Either way, I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a target with a predictable pattern." The second man shifted. "So, what do we do?" The prosecutor's flashlight beam drifted lazily across the space, passing over the wall where I stood like a slow searchlight. I pressed my back harder into the metal. The beam moved on. He didn't see me, or he didn't want to. Then he said something that still haunts me, even at 90, even after everything I did to make sure he'd never speak again. He said, "Call her." "Her?" the second man asked. "Mary Ann," the prosecutor replied. "Tell her the old lion is sniffing the bones." My stomach twisted. Mary Ann was in the room now, in invisible form, her name filling the air like poison gas. The second man stepped out into the corridor to make the call. The prosecutor stayed. Alone, he clicked his tongue, almost amused, and began to speak, as if he were performing for someone. "For me, you can come out, Mercer," he said. "You're not built for hiding. Men like you need an audience." I didn't move. He chuckled. "Fine, be dramatic, but let me tell you how this ends." He set the flashlight down on a box and turned his face toward the dark corner where I stood. His eyes were sharp, predatory, almost kind in a warped way. "You want justice," he said. "You want the world to apologize. You want your name back." His voice lowered. "But the world doesn't apologize. It replaces." He walked slowly, each step deliberate, the heel of his shoe tapping like a clock, counting down. "You were useful once. You made people rich. You made people comfortable. Then you became inconvenient." He stopped. "Now you can either accept the story they wrote, your downfall, your shame, your quiet disappearance." He took one more step. "Or you can fight." His eyes glinted. "And if you fight, I promise you, we will bury you so deep no one will remember the shape of your face." I clenched my fist so hard my nails bit into my palm. I wanted to lunge. I wanted to tear his throat out with my hands. But my mind, for once, was colder than my rage. I had the USB drive. I had the black folder's contents in my memory like a map burned into skin. If I died here, I died with proof still trapped in my pocket. So I did what pride hates most. I waited. The prosecutor exhaled, bored by my silence. He bent again, rummaging through the boxes with practiced impatience. He wasn't looking for everything. He was looking for what Rita had left behind. He found the brown envelope space. Empty. His posture changed in a fraction of a second. That's the thing about professionals. You can see fear the way you see a twitch. Almost invisible. But there. He straightened and stared at the gap. Then his face shifted into something ugly. Son of a... He snatched the flashlight and stormed toward the door. I stayed pressed against the wall, motionless, while he passed within a few feet of me. His shoulder nearly brushed mine. I felt the heat of him, the weight of his authority, the arrogance that had protected him from consequences his whole life. Then he was gone. The unit door slammed. The lock clicked. I stood in darkness again, lungs burning. Only when the footsteps faded did I allow myself to breathe. I waited another full minute, because in the world I had entered, a minute is the difference between survival and a body. Then I moved. I slipped out of the unit and shut the door with a softness that felt unnatural for my hands. The corridor was empty, but the air was charged, as if the building itself had heard my name. I didn't walk like a man fleeing. I walked like a man who belonged. It's a trick the rich learn. If you look like you belong, most systems let you pass. At the front desk, the receptionist looked up, eyes flicking toward my coat pocket where her watch used to be. Her gaze sharpened. I knew what she was thinking. Where's my payment? I approached and leaned in, lowering my voice. I need my watch back, I said. She blinked. Excuse me. The old watch. I repeated, calm but firm. Give it back to me. Now. Her face tightened. You gave it to me? I smiled. A small, humorless thing. I loaned it to you. And if you don't hand it over, I'll tell your boss you've been selling access to units for jewelry. Her mouth opened, closed. Fear beat greed. She pulled the watch out from beneath the counter and slid it to me like contraband. I took it, but I didn't leave yet. I tapped the counter. One more thing, I said. Her shoulders sagged. What? Did anyone else ask about Rita Vance lately? She hesitated. I held her eyes. 2 men, she whispered. One came earlier. Tall, confident. He asked if anyone had been in Unit C 117, the prosecutor. And the other? I asked. She swallowed. A woman. My spine stiffened. What kind of woman? The receptionist's eyes darted away, as if even describing her was dangerous. Beautiful, she said softly, like a magazine. She wore sunglasses even inside. Sunglasses. Inside. That was Mary Ann. That was her signature. Making sure the world looked at her the way she wanted, and never the way she truly was. When was she here? I asked. Yesterday. My blood ran colder. She was ahead of me, or she was circling me. Did she leave a name? I asked. The receptionist shook her head. She didn't need to. Of course she didn't. People like Mary Ann move through spaces the way royalty moves through crowds, without asking permission. I pocketed the watch and turned away. As I walked out, my phone, cheap, prepaid, the kind criminals use, buzzed. A text from an unknown number. One line. Stop digging or your son dies. I froze mid-step. My vision narrowed. My son. My hands began to shake. Now you might be thinking, how could a man as careful as you be vulnerable like that? How could you have a son and keep him in a world that would eat him alive? Because I didn't always know what kind of monsters I'd married into business with. Because when you're rich, you mistake safety for permanence. My son's name was Thomas. At the time, he was grown, an adult with his own life, his own pride, and a relationship with me that had become complicated in the way father-son relationships often do. He blamed me for absence. I blamed myself for believing money could substitute love. He wasn't in my daily life anymore, and that, apparently, made him the perfect hostage. I stood outside Holland's storage with rain whispering against my collar. I read the text again. Then my phone buzzed again. A second message. We know where he works. We know where he sleeps. Walk away. The world tilted. For a moment, all my newfound clarity cracked, replaced by a raw, helpless fear. Because money being taken from you is one kind of pain. But blood is a different currency. I started walking fast, head down, mind racing. I needed to see Thomas. I needed to make sure he was safe. But I also knew the trap. If I ran to him, they could be watching, waiting for me to lead them straight to their prize. I got in a cab and told the driver an address that wasn't Thomas's. 2 blocks away. I watched the mirrors like a paranoid man, because now paranoia wasn't poison. It was oxygen. When I got out, I walked through alleys double back, changed direction twice. Only then did I approach Thomas's building. He wasn't home. I called. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. My pulse thundered. I went to his workplace, a small architecture firm downtown, modest, honest work. It always pleased me that he built things instead of moving numbers, like he'd instinctively rejected the world that had consumed me. When I reached the building, I saw something that turned my stomach into ice. Thomas's car was in the lot, but the driver's seat was empty, and the passenger door was slightly ajar. Not open, just ajar. The subtlety of it was worse than violence. It was a message. We can touch his life without leaving fingerprints. I stepped closer. On the dashboard was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. 2 words, written in elegant, familiar handwriting. Come alone. No signature. None needed. Mary Ann. The location was an address I recognized with bitterness that felt like swallowing glass. A private dining club on the top floor of a building I used to own. Not just work in. Own. Now I was invited like a ghost back to the site of my own funeral. I told myself I wouldn't go. Then I imagined Thomas's blood on pavement. I went. I rode the elevator up with two men in suits who didn't look at me. They didn't recognize me, or they pretended not to. Either way, it was humiliating. At the top, a hostess checked my name. I gave it. She frowned. "You're not on the list." "I'm expected," I said. She opened her mouth to object. Then a voice behind her cut through like a knife. "Let him in." "Mary Ann." I turned. She stood in the doorway to a private room like the final scene of a play. Perfect hair, perfect posture, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Inside the room, candles burned low. The city glittered beyond the windows like a necklace around a throat. Mary Ann removed her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes were the same polished stones. "Elias," she said, as if greeting an old friend, "you look thinner." I hated that my first thought was that she still smelled the same. A subtle perfume that once made my body believe in her. Now it just made me nauseous. "Where is Thomas?" I asked, skipping every pleasantry. Mary Ann gestured to a chair. "Sit." "I'm not here to sit," I said. She sighed, as if I were exhausting. "You always were dramatic," she said. "That's what I loved. And what made you easy." My jaw clenched. "Where's my son?" Mary Ann lifted a wine glass and swirled it, watching the liquid cling to the crystal. "He's fine," she said. "For now." My vision blurred with rage. "If you touch him." She raised a hand, palm outward, a queen silencing a servant. "Elias, don't threaten me. Threats are for people with leverage." She leaned forward slightly. "And you have none." I forced myself to breathe. I forced my voice into calm because I understood something vital. She didn't bring me here to kill me. She brought me here to enjoy me. "What do you want?" I asked. Mary Ann smiled faintly. "That's the first honest question you've asked in years." She set the glass down. "I want you to stop," she said simply. "Stop digging." I replied. "Yes," she said. "Stop sniffing around Rita Vance. Stop chasing ghosts. Stop trying to reclaim what you lost." She tilted her head. "Because, Elias, you didn't lose it. You were removed." Removed. Like a tumor. I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" I asked. Mary Ann smiled, didn't reach her eyes. "Then Thomas disappears," she said. "And then you disappear. And the world will sigh and move on, and Calvin will drink to it." I stared at her. My wife. The woman I once believed could never be cruel. Now cruelty wasn't even effort for her. It was posture, elegance. "Why?" I asked, voice rougher than I wanted. "Why do all this? Why destroy me? You could have left. You could have taken money and vanished." Mary Ann laughed softly. "Oh, Elias," she said, "you still don't understand." She leaned closer, voice low. "I didn't do this because I needed your money." She tapped her chest gently. "I did this because I needed your life." I blinked. She continued, almost tender. "When I met you, you were a fire that everyone wanted to warm themselves by. Calvin wanted your genius. The board wanted your vision. The city wanted your myth." Her eyes sharpened, and I wanted to own it. She reached across the table and brushed her fingertip along the edge of my hand. The touch made my skin crawl. "You were a trophy," she whispered, "and trophies only matter if someone else wanted them." My throat tightened. "So you made me fall," I said. She nodded, serene. "I made you fall," she confirmed, "because watching you fall was exquisite." I felt something inside me split, not heartbreak. Something colder. Acceptance. "You're a monster," I said. Mary Ann smiled. "No," she corrected. "I'm honest." Silence stretched between us like a wire. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "You're lucky I let you live." I stared. "You let me live?" Mary Ann's gaze drifted toward the window, out at the city. "I argued with Calvin," she said. "He wanted you dead. He said you were too dangerous alive. He wanted an accident." Her lips curled. But I said no. "Why?" I asked. though I already knew the answer, because she wanted an audience. Marianne looked back at me. Because you're the only person who can truly appreciate what I did, she said. The world thinks it was business. They think it was greed. She leaned in, eyes bright. But you know it was art. My stomach turned. And Rita, I asked, what did you do to her? Marianne's expression flickered, just a hairline crack. Then it smoothed. Rita was unfortunate, she said. She asked the wrong questions. My blood surged. You killed her. Marianne's voice stayed calm. Calvin handled the logistics. Of course he did, she said like arranging flowers. I felt my hand drift toward my inner pocket where the USB drive sat. Marianne's eyes flicked there, sharp. She saw the movement. She smiled. You found something, she said. I didn't answer. She continued softly, as if coaxing a child. Give it to me, Elias, she said. Hand over whatever you took, and I'll let Thomas go. We can both walk away with what we want. What you want is to erase me, I said. Marianne shrugged. Yes. I looked into her eyes and saw a truth so simple, it was almost beautiful in its ugliness. She didn't hate me. She didn't love me. She saw me as a shape that once served her story. Now I was clutter. I stood slowly. Marianne didn't flinch. The door behind her opened. Calvin Rourke walked in like a man arriving at his own coronation. Same smile, same calm. Older now, but still polished. He looked at me as if I were a piece of property he'd misplaced. Elias, Calvin said warmly. There he is. I felt my pulse spike. I hadn't expected him here. Or maybe I had, and my mind had refused to accept it. Calvin glanced at Marianne. I told you he'd come. Marianne sipped her wine. I never doubted it. Calvin's eyes settled on me. You always were predictable, he said. That's why you were easy. My jaw clenched. You took everything, I said. Calvin spread his hands like a priest offering forgiveness. You built a machine, he said. I simply inherited it. Inherited? I spat. He chuckled. Don't be sentimental. You had your turn. My body hummed with violence. But I remembered the prosecutor's voice. The system was bought. The board was bought. Even justice was rented. If I attacked Calvin now, I'd be the criminal they always claimed I was. So I did the only thing that still belonged to me. I spoke. You're scared, I said. Calvin's smile tightened. Am I? You came here, I said. You didn't send a lawyer. You didn't send a thug. You came. Marianne's gaze sharpened slightly. Calvin's eyes narrowed. I continued, voice steady. That means I found something you can't control. For the first time, a shadow crossed Calvin's expression. It lasted less than a second, but it was there. Marianne set her glass down with a faint clink. Elias, she said softly, don't test us. Calvin took a step closer. You want your son? He asked. Then give us what you took. And if I don't? I asked. Calvin leaned in, voice gentle, intimate. Then you'll never see him again, he said. Not even as a body. The room went cold. Marianne watched me like a woman watching a card trick, eager to see how I'd be fooled. I knew I couldn't win by force, but I could win by leverage. So I lied. I smiled faintly and said, It's not on me. Calvin blinked. What? I made a copy, I said, and I gave it to someone you can't buy. Marianne's eyes flashed. Who? I shrugged. The watchman. Both of them froze. Just a fraction, but enough. Because Rita's note hadn't named Doyle. It had named something symbolic. And symbol, when it hits the right nerve, becomes fear. Calvin recovered first. He laughed too loudly. Cute, he said. You think folklore saves you. Marianne stood, stepping toward me. You don't have anyone, she said. You're alone. I met her gaze. Am I? I said, and then I did something that surprised even me. I pulled out my phone, not to call, to show them. I opened the camera. I aimed it at Calvin. I aimed it at Marianne. And I said, smile. Calvin's expression tightened. What are you doing? Creating evidence. I said, "Of threats, of coercion, of your involvement." Marianne laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Elias," she said, "you think a video matters?" Calvin reached toward my phone. I stepped back. "Careful," I said. "If you touch me, it becomes assault. And I guarantee there are cameras in this room." Calvin stopped. Marianne's laughter faded into a thin smile. Then she leaned in close enough that her perfume crawled into my lungs. She whispered, "You're playing with a knife, Elias, and you don't even know whose hand is on the handle." My mouth went dry, because in that second, I realized something awful. Thomas wasn't just a hostage. He was a message, a demonstration. They were showing me that everything I loved could be turned into leverage. And the worst part? They were right. Marianne stepped back. Calvin's eyes stayed locked on mine. "You have 24 hours, Calvin said. "Bring what you found, or we end your bloodline." Bloodline. Such an ugly word in a man's mouth. Marianne put her sunglasses back on, inside of course, and walked toward the doors of the conversation border. But before she left, she turned and said one last thing. A line so casual it took me a second to understand its meaning. "By the way," she said, "Rita's still in the city." I froze. Calvin's head snapped toward her. Marianne, she tilted her head slightly, amused. "What?" she said. "It's true." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Rita is alive?" I demanded. Marianne's smile returned, slow, poisonous. "Not alive," she said. "Not the way you mean." Then she opened the door and left. Calvin stared at me, jaw tense. For the first time, I saw anger flicker in him. Not at me, at her. That was the plot twist I didn't expect. Calvin and Marianne weren't perfectly aligned. They were partners. Yes, but partners, like predators, eventually bite each other. Calvin leaned in, voice low. "Don't listen to her," he said. "She likes to decorate reality." Then he added, almost as a warning to himself, "But she doesn't lie without reason." He straightened. 24 hours, he repeated, and walked out. The door closed. I stood alone in the candlelight, shaking, not from fear of them, but from the sudden horrifying question Marian had planted in my head. If Rita wasn't alive, but was still in the city, what exactly had they kept, and why? My phone buzzed again. Another message. A photo this time. Thomas, bound to a chair, a strip of tape over his mouth, his eyes wide with terror. Beneath the photo, one sentence. "You have until midnight." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made a decision that would change the shape of my soul. Because until now, I'd been trying to reclaim my name. But with Thomas in their hands, the goal shifted. I didn't want my name back. I wanted them to pay. And to make them pay, I would have to become something I'd spent my life pretending I wasn't. A man capable of going to war. Without rules. At 90, you don't remember time. You feel it, like a pressure behind the eyes, like a weight on the tongue, like a hand on your shoulder reminding you that every choice has a cost and that the bill always comes due. That night, staring at the photo of my son bound to a chair, I understood something with a clarity so sharp it almost felt merciful. Calvin and Marian weren't negotiating. They were issuing terms. And terms only exist when you still believe the other side can be reasoned with. I stopped believing. I sat on the edge of a cheap bed in a cheaper room, holding the phone like it was a live wire. The USB drive pressed against my ribs in my inner pocket, as if it were trying to fuse itself to my heart. Proof on one side, blood on the other. Midnight. A deadline is a weapon because it forces your mind to choose between logic and love. And love will always sabotage logic. So I did what I hadn't done since the day they threw my suitcases to the curb. I made a plan that didn't require them to keep their word, because predators never do. Rita's note said, "Find the watchman, back of Holland storage." I threatened Marianne with that phrase and watched her flinch, just enough to prove it meant something real. It wasn't my father, not directly. It was a code, a person, yes, but also a concept. Someone who keeps time for people who can't afford to lose it. I thought of Doyle immediately. But Doyle had told me never contact him again. And men like Doyle don't say things like that unless they're already being watched. So I went backwards. I returned to the receptionist's eyes, to the weight of that old watch in her hand, the way she'd looked at it like it was worth sin. People who live small lives don't risk big trouble unless someone bigger taught them what trouble costs. I went back to Holland's storage after dark, not through the front, through the side lot, behind the dumpsters, where a service gate had a keypad with war numbers, 1 and 9, pressed more than the others. Habit, the human fingerprint in machinery. I didn't guess. I read. I punched in 1990. The gate clicked open like it was expecting me. Inside, the place was quieter than before, but not empty. Security monitors glowed behind glass. A single guard sat in a chair, head tipped back, eyes half closed, sleeping, or pretending. I moved past him like a shadow. At the office door, I stopped. A paper was taped there, crooked, as if placed in a hurry. 3 words, printed in clean, blocky letters. Check Unit A009. No signature, but it felt like Rita, or someone who had read Rita. Unit A009 wasn't like the others. The corridor leading to it was cleaner, less dust, fewer cobwebs. Like people actually came here. I reached the door and noticed the lock. It wasn't the same electronic key system. It was old, mechanical, a padlock. Someone had changed it. Recently, I pulled a small tool from my pocket, something I bought years ago for a ridiculous reason, a gentleman's survival kit, gift from Calvin, of all people. The irony made me almost laugh. It took me under a minute. When the lock fell away, I opened the door and stepped into cold air. No boxes, no paper, no clutter, only a table, a single chair, and a wall of filing cabinets like a confession built in steel. And on the table, under a small lamp, sat an old pocket watch. Its lid open, its face lit like a tiny moon. Beside it, a handwritten note. My throat tightened as I read the first line. "You're late, Elias." I froze. Only one person had ever used my name in that tone, half amused, half disappointed. Like he owned the schedule of my life. Doyle. I read on. "Don't look for me. I'm already looking at you. If you came here, it means the clock is running. Your son is alive, but not safe. Calvin doesn't keep hostages. He keeps contracts." I stared at that last sentence until it sank into my bones. Contracts, not paperwork. People. Then the note delivered its gift. The kind that feels like poison at first because it forces you to accept how deep the rot goes. Thomas isn't the first. He's the second. Second, meaning there was a first. My hands began to shake. I kept reading. Rita Vance discovered an off-book structure used to launder not only money, but liability. People disappear. Assets move. The system stays clean. The prosecutor isn't paid. He's owned. Marianne is not your enemy's lover. She is your enemy's insurance. I swallowed hard. Insurance. A policy. A guarantee. The kind of guarantee Calvin would keep close because it could either save him or destroy him. I reached the bottom of the note and my breath caught. Opened the 3rd drawer. I stepped to the filing cabinets and pulled open the 3rd drawer. Inside was a folder. Inside the folder was a photograph. Not Calvin. Not Marianne. Not the prosecutor. It was Thomas, younger, standing next to Calvin, smiling. My vision blurred. I stared at the image like it was a hallucination, like reality itself was trying to betray me again. Thomas's arm was around Calvin's shoulder, as if they were family. My son's handwriting was on the back, scrawled in a youthful rush. "Thanks for believing in me." My knees weakened. In that moment, a truth I hadn't allowed into my mind finally forced its way in. Thomas didn't hate my world. He'd been pulled toward it. And Calvin, the man who destroyed me, had somehow gotten close enough to my son to earn his gratitude. I stood there in the cold storage unit, holding the photo, feeling the shape of the trap. Calvin hadn't just taken my money and my wife. He'd been taking my son too, slowly, carefully, like a thief removing bricks from a house until it collapses, and the owner still blames the wind. My phone buzzed. A new message. No words, just a location pin. And a time. 11:15 p.m. 55 minutes. Then one last line. Bring the USB. So they knew. Of course they knew. Because the moment you touch the bones of a predator's secrets, the predator smells your fingerprints. I looked down at the pocket watch on the table, still open, ticking softly. Tick, tick, tick. I understood what Doyle meant. The watchman wasn't just a person. It was a warning. Time is a knife. I left Holland storage with the pocket watch in my coat pocket and a new sickness in my chest. The photo, Thomas with Calvin. It didn't mean my son was complicit. It didn't even mean he understood what Calvin was. But it meant something worse. Calvin had a psychological hold on him, and psychological holds are harder to break than rope. I drove to the pin location in a stolen car, stolen in the cleanest way possible. I paid a desperate man cash to forget it in a lot for one night. No violence, just the same moral corrosion my old life had always demanded. The location was an industrial building near the river, half abandoned, the kind of place where you could scream and the city would pretend it didn't hear. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, keeping the shadows. At the entrance, a single light burned above a metal door, and beside the door stood a man with a hood, holding a cigarette like it was the only warmth left in his life. He watched me approach. "You Mercer?" he asked. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. He said, "You come alone." "Where's my son?" I asked. The man flicked ash. "Inside." He opened the door and waved me in. The building smelled of oil and old water. My footsteps echoed like guilty thoughts. We reached a large room. A single chair sat in the center under a hanging lamp, like an interrogation scene from film. And there, tied to the chair, tape on his mouth, was Thomas. His eyes lifted when he saw me. The terror in them ripped something open in my chest. I rushed forward, but the hooded man grabbed my arm. "Rules," he said. I stopped myself from breaking his jaw. Barely. A second door opened. Calvin walked in. No jacket. No tie. Casual, like he was hosting a late-night game. And Marianne followed him, wearing black, sunglasses still on, because of course. Thomas tried to speak through the tape. The sound was muffled, desperate. Marianne glanced at him, the way you glance at a noisy appliance. "Can you please?" she began, then sighed. "It's fine. He'll stop soon." Calvin smiled at me. "Elias." I stared at him, then at Marianne. "Take the tape off." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "That depends." My hand tightened around the USB drive in my pocket, a hard little rectangle holding enough truth to collapse empires. "You want this," I said. Calvin's smile widened. "Yes." "And you'll let him go?" I asked. Calvin chuckled softly, like I'd said something adorable. "Oh, Elias," he said, "you still think this is a trade." Marianne stepped closer, her heels clicking like punctuation. "This isn't negotiation," she said. "It's a correction." Correction. Like my existence was a typo. Calvin walked slowly around Thomas, inspected him like property. He peeled the tape off Thomas's mouth with a casual cruelty that made my vision go red. Thomas sucked in air and said, voice shaking, "Dad." Calvin slapped him. Not hard enough to break bone. Hard enough to break dignity. Thomas flinched. My body surged forward. 2 men appeared from the shadows, guns low but present, like punctuation marks in Calvin's sentence. Calvin held up a hand. "Easy." Thomas stared at me, eyes wet. "Dad, I swear." "I know," I said, though I didn't know. "Not fully. Not yet." Marianne leaned toward Thomas and whispered something in his ear. Thomas's face paled. Then she looked at me and said, "He's going to tell you something." Thomas's throat bobbed. "Dad." Calvin helped me. When you fell, nobody would take my calls. Nobody would hire me. My projects, everything dried up. I felt the floor tilt. Calvin smiled as if he were enjoying a fine meal. Thomas continued, voice cracking. He said you'd stolen. He said you were sick. He said you'd bring me down if I stayed close. Marianne's mouth curved. He listened. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut. I was angry. I thought you chose money over me. I thought you deserved. He stopped. He looked at me like a child realizing the monster is real. I'm sorry, he whispered. My heart didn't soften. It hardened. Because I understood now. Calvin hadn't just bought the system. He bought my absence. He'd used the space where I should have been a father to plant himself like a parasite. Calvin stepped forward. Touching, he said. Truly. I looked at him. You used him. Calvin shrugged. I used everything. That's why I win. Marianne tilted her head. Enough. Give us the USB. I didn't move. Calvin's eyes narrowed slightly. Midnight is close. I know, I said. Marianne's voice sharpened. Then choose. And that was the moment I saw the truth of this room. They didn't need the USB to end me. They wanted it because it would make them feel safe. But safety is a drug, and addicts always want more. I took the USB out slowly. Calvin's gaze locked onto it. I held it up between my fingers like a tiny black heart. You want proof? I said, then you'll give me proof. Calvin blinked. What? On camera, I said, lifting my phone. You will say what you did. You'll say you framed me. You'll say you took the money. You'll say what happened to Rita Vance. Marianne laughed. You're insane. Maybe, I said, but you're greedy, and greed makes people stupid. Calvin's smile faded. You don't have leverage. I nodded toward Thomas. I do. Marianne's laughter died. Her head turned slightly toward Calvin, a silent warning. Calvin stared at me. I saw a calculation in his eyes. The internal math of risk. Then Calvin smiled again. Fine, he said. I'll say it. Marianne snapped, Calvin. He ignored her, eyes on me. But first, he gestured to Thomas. He goes with her. Marianne's eyes flashed. What? Calvin's voice stayed calm. I said I'd say it. I didn't say when. Marianne takes him to the car. I speak. You hand over the USB. I felt the trap close. Because if Marianne took Thomas out of the room, Thomas vanished into the city like Rita. I looked at Marianne. She was smiling behind her sunglasses. Calvin's insurance. And suddenly, Rita's note hit me in a new way. Marianne is not your enemy's lover. She is your enemy's insurance. Insurance doesn't get traded away. Insurance gets kept. Always. I realized then that Calvin and Marianne weren't aligned tonight. They were negotiating with each other in front of me. Predators biting. And that was my opening. So I did the only thing left. I broke the rules. I threw the USB across the room. Not to Calvin. To the shadows behind him. A small black object vanishing into darkness. Calvin's head snapped around. What did you do? Marianne took one step back. Elias. The room shifted. Men moved. Guns lifted. And from the shadows, a voice spoke, calm, familiar, poised with amusement. Time's up. Doyle stepped into the light. He held the USB in one hand. In the other, he held a gun. But it wasn't aimed at Calvin. It was aimed at Marianne. Marianne froze. Even through the sunglasses, I felt her shock. Calvin's face tightened. Doyle! Doyle smiled. Hello, Calvin. And then Doyle said the sentence that cracked the entire night open like a skull. You told Marianne you'd never used the real insurance. Calvin's eyes flickered. Marianne's head turned slowly toward Calvin. What is he talking about? She asked, quiet, deadly. Calvin didn't answer fast enough. And in that half-second of silence, I understood. Marianne thought she was the insurance. But there was another policy. A deeper one. Something Calvin kept even from her. Something tied to Rita Vance. Something tied to my son. Something tied to the reason Rita was still in the city. Not alive, not the way I meant. Doyle's gun didn't move. His voice stayed calm. Let the boy go, Doyle said. Or I tell her what you did with Rita. Marianne's breath caught. Thomas stared between them, confused, terrified. Calvin's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. I stood there, heart pounding, and realized I was no longer just fighting for my name. I was standing at the edge of Calvin's true secret, the one he'd buried deepest, the one that could destroy him. And Marianne, my Marianne, was about to learn she'd been married to a man who didn't just betray. He archived betrayal like trophies. Midnight was seconds away. The pocket watch in my coat felt heavy, alive. Tick, tick, tick. Doyle's finger tightened slightly. Marianne's head angled toward Calvin. And Calvin, for the first time in decades, looked afraid. Midnight arrived the way death arrives. Quietly, without ceremony, and with the rude certainty that no one gets more time just because they beg well. The hanging lamp above Thomas flickered once, as if the building itself had a pulse. Doyle kept the gun aimed at Marianne. Calvin kept his eyes on Doyle. Marianne kept her head turned toward Calvin, slow, precise, like a blade being drawn. And I stood between all of them, holding nothing but breath and resolve, realizing that the most dangerous moment in any man's life is the moment he finally understands the real shape of the people he loved. Marianne's voice came out low. "What did you do with Rita?" she asked Calvin. Calvin tried to smile, but the smile had nowhere to anchor. "This isn't the time," he said. "We're handling Mercer." Marianne took one step closer to him. "I asked you a question," she repeated, each word clipped and cold. Doyle's voice cut in. "Tell her, Calvin." Calvin's eyes flicked the gun, then to Thomas, then to me. And for the first time since my collapse, I saw him as he truly was. Not a king, not a mastermind. A man who'd gotten away with too much for too long, and had confused luck with immortality. He exhaled. "Rita was a problem," Calvin said. Marianne's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Calvin's tone sharpened, losing polish. "She was going to burn us." "Us." Marianne echoed. Calvin paused just long enough. That pause was a confession in its own language. Marianne's voice dropped further. "You mean burn you?" Calvin's eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't do this now." But Marianne was already doing it. Marianne lived for scenes like this. The private stage. The audience of the damned. Doyle said, "Tell her the part about the container." My heart slammed. Container. Rita still in the city? Not alive. Not the way I meant. Calvin's face went stiff. "You talk too much, Doyle." Doyle smiled. "I learn from you." Marianne's head turned slightly toward Doyle. "Container?" Doyle didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Calvin. He kept her. That's what he did. He kept her like an insurance policy. Thomas let out a small, strangled sound. I felt my stomach fold inward. Marianne's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. A queen hearing that her crown was counterfeit. "You kept her," Marianne said to Calvin. Calvin's voice rose. "You don't understand." Marianne stepped right up to him now. "No, I understand perfectly." Her hands were calm. Her breath was calm. But I saw it. Her fury wasn't the kind that explodes. It was the kind that writes history. Some losses don't get repaid. They get carried. We drove to the river in the stolen car. The city slept, ignorant, comfortable. At the container yard, floodlights painted everything in harsh white. Metal giants stacked like coffins. Doyle led us through gaps and shadows, moving like a man who'd done this too many times. He stopped at one container. No markings. No company logo. Just a number. A009. The same as the storage unit. My stomach twisted. Doyle handed me a bolt cutter. "This is your choice," he said. "What do you mean?" Doyle met my eyes. "Once you open it, you can't pretend anymore." I didn't respond. I cut the lock. It snapped with a loud, final sound. I pulled the container door. It creaked open, and the smell hit me first. Chemical, stale, sweet in the worst way. Inside, under a single hanging bulb, was a chair, and beside it, a sealed plastic-wrapped bundle. Not a person. Not alive. A body. Rita Vance. I staggered back as if the air itself had slapped me. Thomas made a choking noise and turned away, vomiting into the gravel. Doyle stood still, jaw clenched. I walked forward, slow, numb, and stared at the woman who tried to save me, tried to save us, and died for it. I felt tears rise, not the clean kind, but the ugly kind, the kind that tastes like metal. Why keep her? I whispered. Doyle's voice was rough. Insurance. Proof of leverage. A promise. My hands shook. Then I saw it, taped to the inside of the container wall. A small envelope. A final note. I tore it down and opened it with trembling fingers. Rita's handwriting. One last time. If you're reading this, they thought they could bury truth in steel. They were wrong. The accounts are copied. The names are listed. The prosecutors recorded. And Marianne Mercer is not who she claims. Burn this place into the world. At the bottom, a code, coordinates, and 2 words. The ledger. Doyle exhaled. That's it. I turned to him. What is it? Doyle looked away. A full ledger. Every payment. Every bribe. Every transfer. Names that would shake the city. My mouth went dry. Where? Doyle nodded toward the riverbank. Under the old pier, he said. Hidden where nobody looks. Thomas, pale and shaking, whispered, Dad, please. I stared at Rita's body, and something in me turned to stone. We took the ledger. We took the copies. We took the recordings. And we didn't go to the police. We went to the only thing that terrifies a bot system. Exposure. We released it in pieces. First, the prosecutor's payments. Anonymous dropped the journalists with clean reputations and deep legal teams. Then the shell structures. Then the board emails. Then the audio. Then the photographs. The city woke up to its own corruption, like a man waking up to find his house is on fire. The prosecutor resigned within 48 hours. Calvin's empire began to collapse in public. Banks closing. Partners fleeing. Deals evaporating. The same people who once praised him now calling him a disgrace. And Marianne? Marianne vanished. Of course she did. She was always better at exits than entrances. They never found her in court. They never put cuffs on her wrists. But I knew something the world didn't. Marianne doesn't disappear to hide. Marianne disappears to return. In a new dress. With a new name. With a new audience. As for Calvin, he lived. He lived with a ruined face and a ruined name. He lost everything the way I did, but unlike me, he didn't have the dignity of rebuilding. He became a whisper, a warning, a man people pointed at and said, "Look what happens when greed forgets discretion." My charges were quietly dropped. Quietly, because the system hates admitting it was wrong. No apology, no parade, just a door opening that should have never been closed. My name returned to me like a stolen heirloom, scratched, damaged, but mine. Thomas and we did not heal quickly. We couldn't. He moved through months like a man carrying a broken mirror inside him. Sometimes he couldn't look at me. Sometimes I couldn't look at him. But blood is stubborn. And so, over time, we spoke. Not to erase what happened. To name it. To stop it from becoming a ghost that controls everything else. You asked how I rebuilt. Here's the part people don't like. Because it isn't romantic. After the collapse, I spent years surviving. Then at 60, I began again. Not with companies. With numbers. With the market. While the world slept, I studied. I learned the new language of finance. Derivatives, options chains, volatility, macro cycles. I treated my mind like a blade that had been dulled by grief and needed sharpening. I began small. I took asymmetrical bets, risk-controlled, upside large. I learned patience the way monks learn silence. And I did what Calvin never could. I accepted being invisible. I didn't chase applause. I chased compounding. Year after year, trade after trade, I rebuilt my fortune quietly, cleanly, obsessively. By 70, I was wealthy again. By 80, I was richer than I'd ever been. And by 90, I sat in a quiet room and told you the story because money returned, but something else returned with it. My ability to look at my past without flinching. People always ask, did Mary never come back? Yes. Not to court. Not to apologize. Not to beg. She came back in the only way she ever could, as a shadow at the edge of my life. On my 89th birthday, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my old wedding ring, the same one she returned like a receipt, polished, clean, and beneath it, a slip of paper with one sentence. Art deserves an encore. No signature. None needed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed the ring in a drawer and locked it. Because at 90, you understand what youth refuses to accept. Some monsters can't be killed. They can only be outlived. And I did. I outlived the man who tried to erase me. I outlived the system that sold me. I outlived the lie they wrote around my name. I rebuilt, not just wealth, a self. And if there's a lesson here, if a 90-year-old man can offer you anything worth keeping, it's this. Betrayal is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different kind of power. The kind you earn not by winning early, but by surviving long enough to watch the world finally understand who the villains were. My name is Elias Mercer, and now you know the truth.